is Paul Cho. I am a graduate student at the University of San Diego, and this is my Cybersecurity Operations and Leadership Course 580, Cyber Threat Intelligence, final presentation. I'm going to start with an overview of what we'll be covering today. We're going to be defining cyber threat intelligence, going through a business case presentation, adversarial assessment, going through some cyber threat actors, some cyber threats, common types of attacks, recent attacks, and then a risk reduction plan. Fine, cyber threat intelligence is a process of gathering and analyzing actionable information to stay ahead of competitors and attackers. Now, when we look at the basic definitions of intelligence and cyber threat, we see that intelligence, as I've defined it already, is a process of gathering and analyzing actionable information, whereas cyber threats are the possibility of a malicious attempt to damage or disrupt a computer network or system. When we combine these two, we come up with a definition of a process of gathering and analyzing actionable information on cyber threats to stay ahead of competitors and attackers. For our business case analysis, we have selected the iSight Fusion Intelligence subscription available through FireEye. This product addresses a gap that most companies have in coordinating and distributing actionable intelligence across their organization, and it addresses the gap by providing intelligence through information portals, including threat actor and malware profiles, along with data feeds and alerts. The total cost of ownership we estimate for our organization to be approximately $250,000 per year, with a return on investment ranging from 152% to 284% based on ROI studies conducted by FireEye. And the reasons to adopt is that many organizations, including our own, do not have a consolidated portal that tracks, informs executives, and relays status of critical cybersecurity systems to the organization. iSight not only provides this central resource, but it can be supplemented with FireEye experts and expertise to help research and resolve incidents. Lastly, preventing attacks will not only save money, it will help our organization excel without being set back severely by a cyber threat. Example of our cyber threat intelligence program capabilities, we have conducted an adversarial assessment of an emerging competitor, Uber. On this slide, you see their vitals, location, address, contact information, and key officers. We conducted a financial analysis. Uber is planning an IPO in the second half of 2019. They currently have $7.3 billion in cash, and their valuation for their IPO was recently rumored to be in the $90 billion range. This demonstrates that the company is financially viable, and our competitive analysis shows that they are more than a communications technology company. Their technology is extended into self-driving cars, business travel services, freight shipping, just to name a few. Their technology is historically disruptive of the field that they are entering, aggressively marketed and implemented, and quickly earning market share and recognition. Given their massive cash stockpile, we should be concerned if they decide to go after our sector. Conducted an XY matrix analysis of Uber's current market direction using the driving forces of the Uber IPO and the Uber investment in technology in terms of the direction they're heading in. So using these driving factors, we're able to chart out a couple scenarios. The scenario with the most risk to our organization is Uber is successful with an IPO and decides to go after a technology sector like our own. And this is a high risk to our organization as they'll be well funded and aggressively pursuing our customers. Time should be dedicated to corporate strategies to grow, retain, and or win back customer base. The best case scenario is if the Uber IPO fails and Uber decides to invest in another field of technology. This will most likely mean that Uber will be struggling given their current cash burn rate, and our company could invest heavily financially to get ahead since they will not be a direct competitor and their IPO failed to generate the capital they needed to enter our market. Intelligence program can also enable us to determine major threat actors that may affect our cybersecurity. We have APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, which we'll talk about later. We have organized groups, which include competitors. Competitors typically will be using OSINT or open source intelligence, such as viewing our website, viewing our public information, or interviewing former employees, or even resorting to illegal or semi-legal tactics such as reverse engineering or corporate espionage. Typically, competitors look for insiders within our organization uh, to subvert and allow them to gain access to our resources. Next, we have nation states. In this case, for our business, we are concerned with China. In a recent report by the Director of National Intelligence, it was revealed that China has a vested interest in U.S. intellectual property. And because we are an U.S. intellectual property company, technology company in the U.S., that makes us a prime target for theft and reverse engineering. We also have organized crime groups. These typically are involved in things like ransomware, which is locking users out of a system and holding it for ransom, phishing scams, which are emails targeted at internal users to get credentials or data from our organization, manipulation of botnets, which is taking over our network to perform unwanted actions like emailing out spam or mining cryptocurrency or inserting malware onto computer systems. We also have hacktivist groups, which typically are defined by denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, or disruptions of network or computer resources to gain social notoriety or affect social change. Now, each of these threat actors use a variety of attack methods and tools, but all the attacks can be mapped to a model known as the cyber kill chain. This model was developed by Lockheed Martin, a defense contractor of the United States government, and basically it consists of reconnaissance or a planning phase of an operation where they conduct research to understand our organization, weaponization. The next phase is when they couple malware and exploit into a deliverable payload, typically using automated tools. So they're combining malicious software and a known vulnerability to get into our system. Then the next step is delivery of this weaponized bundle via email, USB stick to a computer, via web, however it may be. The next step after that is exploitation. This is where they use the vulnerability to gain access to our systems. Next is installation. This is when the malware is installed or a backdoor is installed that allows the attacker to maintain access to our systems for an extended period of time. The next phase is called command and control. This is where the malware communicates back to the attacker, which then remotely manipulates our systems. And lastly, we have actions on objective, which is where the intruders accomplish the mission of their attack, which may include collecting user credentials, privilege escalation, internal reconnaissance, collecting and exfiltrating data, destroying systems, overriding or corrupting and or modifying data. Attacks that occur include APTs, which are advanced persistent threats, which are usually long-term attack campaigns on a company. After initial penetration of the network, they remain hidden, accumulating data such as intellectual property or intellectual property research or internal monitoring internal communications. We also have OSINT attacks. These are open source intelligence attacks, which means they're using openly available information to gather intelligence on a competitor, as mentioned earlier. We also have insider attacks. These are threats from within our own organization. Motivations for subverting an insider are financial gain, personal gain, revenge, or other personal motivation, and or coercion by external parties. And by coercion, we're talking about blackmail or physical threats to force an insider to cooperate. We also have social engineering attacks. These are attacks on the network using stolen credentials, usually through impersonation, leveraging social status, and or using emotional connections with victims within our organization. Distributed denial of service attacks. These attacks disrupt operations by massively overloading our network or computing resources. Phishing attacks. These are typically falsified communications, usually emails, used to gather credentials and or personal data to gain access to an organization or individual's resources. Malware. Malware can cover a lot of different things, but the trend that we're seeing in the current cybersecurity space is botnets, which is inserting malware so that attackers can control large fleets of computers and networks, credential stealing, modification, viruses, which can serve multiple purposes but generally interfere with the operation of a computer or network, and ransomware, which is malware or malicious software that encrypts and disables a computer or network, typically requiring payment to unlock or re-enable access. And lastly, we see close physical access attacks. This is an attacker getting within physical proximity of an organization's computing systems or network and being able to gain access or control a resource using stolen credentials. So the more recent attacks that we're going to be talking about today are the NotPetya attack in 2017. This was an attack by the Russian military aimed at the nation of Ukraine, and within seconds it spread globally. It did an estimated $10 billion in damage, with one of the most crippled organizations being Maersk, which handles shipping for 1/5 of the world's freight. Their whole network was completely offline for 10 days and took 2 months to reach a full recovery state. The WannaCry virus of 2017 was a ransomware attack which was unique because it incorporated replication features usually found in a virus or a worm. It was the first such ransomware attack to include this functionality. It's considered by some to be the worst ransomware attack on known record, affecting some 300,000 systems. The U.S. asserted that this attack was made by the North Koreans with an aim of creating havoc and destruction. Lastly, one of the more interesting attacks of 2016 was the Mirai Internet of Things botnet attack, originally created by an undergraduate student at Rutgers. The code was distributed publicly, and shortly afterwards, the entire internet was brought to a standstill when an infrastructure company known as DIN Inc. Was brought down for several hours, and then a second attack followed in the afternoon, also lasting for several hours. DIN reported that tens of millions of IP addresses or tens of millions of devices were being used to attack their servers, just to indicate the severity and magnitude of the Mirai botnet infection. To reduce the risk of these type of attacks occurring and being successful on our network and within our organization, we would want to do the following to address these vulnerabilities which were discovered during those 3 recent attacks. We would want to close or restrict access to SMB network protocol port 139 and 445. That is how WannaCry and NotPetya were able to replicate itself across networks and outside of the organizations to affect global networks. So we would want to limit their access to these ports, and we'd also want to install Microsoft patch MS17-010, which was actually released a couple months before these attacks, and had the machines been patched, it would have rendered these attacks much less effective. We also want to change the default administrator usernames and passwords. This was a vulnerability that the Mirai botnet attack took advantage of. It used a combination of 61 common default administrator username and passwords and brute force access to tens of millions of devices. So we would definitely want to change our administrator username and passwords. We also want to restrict access to Telnet port 23. This is how the Mirai botnet was able to communicate to its command and control channel. So shutting that down would greatly hamper the effect of any Mirai variants that arise in the future. Another vulnerability to address is the disruption of operations. So to do that, we need to implement business continuity planning and disaster recovery. So having some contingency planning to help minimize the disruption of an attack. Now, all of these implementations should be done within 30 days of acceptance. And in the case of disruption of operations, we want to review quarterly our business continuity plan and disaster recovery for changes in operations and requirements. Another vulnerability to address was hijacked account access. Mirai again was able to brute force tens of millions of devices. Implementing two-factor authentication will increase the complexity of hijacking an account, slow an attacker down, and also restrict their access. So we recommend 100% compliance with this within 120 days, with the standard 30 days from acceptance of the recommendation for implementation. Out of date or unpatched machines and or devices. Now, most of the attacks that were able to get through our defensive measures were exploiting known vulnerabilities, many of which are patchable, are updatable by the operating system, hardware, and software vendors. And so we want to make sure we're vigilantly and consistently applying patches to machines and or devices, remove devices off the network that are non-compliant within 24 hours. And give them a remediation plan to give them an opportunity to comply within 72 hours. Otherwise, the machine will have to stay off the network. Now, the timeline for implementation of full patching of all systems is 180 days, given that we've got thousands of machines. But we do request that all devices be scanned on the network every 24 hours for compliance. Another vulnerability that was discovered is the information overload to leadership during an attack. Attacks were coming from different vectors, different areas of the organization simultaneously, making it difficult to track and isolate the attacker and the attack methods. To do this, we want to implement the Security Incident Response Program with a single point of contact to coordinate the cybersecurity response and keep leadership informed. Now, we would like to implement this within 60 days of acceptance of the recommendation, with practical drills performed at least once quarterly uh, to measure response times and accuracy of our countermeasures. And lastly, we have the lack of awareness of an urgent cyber threat globally or locally. And often businesses are not aware of cyber threats facing them. And the information may be available but not accessible by our organization. And this can be resolved by implementing a cyber threat intelligence plan to expedite awareness of urgent worldwide and localized threats to our organization. We highly recommend this to be done within 30 days of acceptance of the recommendation, with a quarterly review of the program for effectiveness and cost efficiency. This concludes the Cyber Threat Intelligence Program presentation. If you have any questions, you can contact me at pcho@sandiego.edu. I hope that this presentation was informative.